Everyone, thanks for watching. Here, excited to have Greg Bailey with us. So we're going to go into some questions about his background, what he's up to. And obviously me and Jeff are going to hammer him. So here's the first question for you, Greg. So, the first thing, I guess, let people know, who is Greg Bailey? First couple jobs, schooling, all that fun stuff would be great.
Sure. I'm Canadian, born in Toronto, went to high school in Toronto, then went to university at Western Ontario, which is in London, Ontario, Canada. Went into med school, graduated med school, and worked as a emergency room physician, for those of you in England, A&E, for 10 years. While I was doing that, because it's a fixed period of time, you're usually 40 hours a week, so you have 128 hours left over. And since we all graduate med school as workaholics, that meant that I had to do lots of other things in those 128 hours. Started getting involved with business, got a bit of a reputation in Toronto as a doctor who had some business acumen, as I was doing real estate, and the real estate projects were working out quite well. I got headhunted to be the CEO of a biotech company with a product for male pattern baldness, and failed in phase 1. So that was my great initiation into biotech. And then got headhunted for a medical device company, which sold to Foxmeyer. And then I decided to give up on emergency medicine. We can go into that if you like, and focus exclusively on business. And had pretty good luck as far as creating a medical device company called Ascent Healthcare, which sold to Stryker for $500 million. And then with David Hung and Pat Machado, I financed them and joined the board of directors of a company called Medivation, which went from 12 million pre to 14.3 billion over 12 years, and created one of the top products in the world for prostate cancer, which is on the market today. Then we started a company called Biohaven with my new business partners, Declan Dugan, former head of drug development at Pfizer, and Jim Mellon, a polymath, extraordinary gentleman. And we financed a company called Biohaven that Deck was a founder of with Vlad Korich and Rob Berman. And happily, in 6 years, it is on the New York Stock Exchange, marketing a drug for migraine, and $4 billion market cap from 3.3 million pre-money. And then we decided that the time was right, that the science was actually there to start a company to find therapies to modify aging, ideally to reverse it, not just slow or halt it, although I think most of us would be happy with us slowing or halting aging.
No, okay.
And that company is Juvenescence.
Juvenescence, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, well, we'll get into what you're doing today in a couple of more questions. I guess more into kind of how you go from an ER doctor to the business king that you are today. Like, do you want to help me help the people? Like, why you go to school for so long, you're committed to helping people, and then now you're helping people in a different way on the business side, but maybe walk me through kind of what was life like as an ER doctor, and why did you want to switch to business?
And
ER.
Sorry for interrupting, Greg. It's a really interesting question, because you're involved in not just the 4 or 5 companies that Jason mentioned, which the majority are public, a couple are private, but actually you've had a big involvement in many public companies and private companies. You sit on the board, you act as usually C-level in these companies, and you've had a lot of these, and you've had a lot of massive successes. So how does that transition, like Jason mentioned, from ER doctor go from being not just a passive investor in a deal that trades in the stock market all of a sudden, but from the guy that actually put it all together, you and your partners, you structured it, you put it together, you thought it well through, and you raised not just small bits of capital, but massive amounts of capital.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate with the capital raise. So ER was fantastic. It fit my personality like a glove. You have to be, you don't know what's walking through the door. It's such an eclectic mix of people. You've got to remember, that to check Mrs. Smith's x-ray and Mr. Jones's lab test and just run everything along the way. Along the way, also delivered 55 babies who didn't have time to make it to the obstetrical unit. So, it was really cool. By the end of it, though, 20 to 30% of everybody you see after 8 o'clock is inebriated. They quite often hurt themselves. They're obnoxious. And I was sort of losing the empathy, losing the love. And so that seemed like an opportune time to step away. I didn't go to business school. And so my training was on the job training. I guess the key skill sets for, because I know this has got an entrepreneurial audience, is it is so important to be a good communicator, because if you can do that, that's fantastic. And what I was able to do is take complicated issues, whether it's graph neural convolutional networks and machine learning, or a monoclonal antibody, and put it into terms that investors could understand, sort of translate it across. So that has served me incredibly well. But the biggest key to having had companies go through $21 billion in market cap was the element of just finding extraordinary people. And I learned, David Hung, the CEO of Medivation, said we got to hire the top people. It's got to be people in the top 25%, and it will serve you well. And it was unbelievable. Our phase 2 clinical trial was so well run, the FDA allowed it to be one of the FDA. It said that we could be a phase 3 trial, which saves you 2 years and $100 million. So hats off to Lynn Seeley, the chief medical officer. And then we did our test for prostate cancer. We were in a competition at the time with Johnson & Johnson. And they powered it with 1,500 people. We powered it with 1,800. They didn't get overall survival. We did. We do $2 billion in sales. They do $1 billion in sales. So work with great people. Super, super important. It's what we build at Juvenescence. My team is extraordinary for a microcap biotech. So those were sort of the transition and the lessons I learned along the way. Work with extraordinary people, and communication skills are so important. So if you don't have it as a natural ability, go to acting class, learn how to do it.
Yeah,
great point.
Greg, really curious, were there any early kind of learning experiences you had in the business world? Obviously, you came from the super educated, science side, working with people, and then you get thrown into business where everyone wants to make money. What was kind of your first learning experiences?
It's work with extraordinary people. So I learned an awful lot along the way from a guy named Jerry Shefsky of public companies. I very early on learned not to deal with VCs. I'm okay dealing with crossover funds who know you're going public. But venture capitalists, I think they're probably not as bad now, but in the 90s, they were ruthless. So we had a deal that I co-founded with a couple of other partners to reprocess used medical equipment. And it was supposed to be financed by a group of very accomplished VCs at $2 a share. And then at the 11th hour, when they knew we desperately needed the money because they sort of protracted the negotiations, they knocked it down to 50 cents and crushed us. They moved the CEO out. They got rid of the board and took it over. It sold for $521 million to Stryker. And as I truthfully say, the 520 was for them, the 1 million was for me. So I stopped doing VC deals. I also began to cheat towards, as Jeffrey mentioned earlier, going public earlier. So when you look at capital pools, there is VC money where they've got to make a 7 to 10x return in 7 years to do their fund. And then there's public deals where everybody's over the moon if they get a 15% compounded return. So the cheaper money is public. It comes with the expense of being public, but it's cheaper money. And so what you always say to any of the companies that I've created is this element of let's find the least dilutive capital and to structure it. So that was my big lesson, was the VC crush down.
Greg, maybe do you want to explain a little bit more? If anyone Googles, Greg Bailey, they see Biohaven. Do you want to talk about that company maybe a little bit more and your success there? And then we'll go into kind of what your focus is today.
So the Biohaven mythology is Declan called me and he said, I've got this very interesting company with these two great scientists, Vlad Korich and Rob Berman, and will you look at it? And at the time, I used investing for myself personally, but also for a little public shell that we had, which had $3.5 million called Portage, good Canadian name, biotech. And so I said, yeah, I said, I'd like to meet the team. And so what we agreed to do was to meet at a Motel 6 outside of Hartford Airport in October of 2013. And Vlad, Rob, and Deck were there. And they pitched me the story. And it was one that I felt I could communicate very easily. I felt that it made great sense. They'd already done work at Yale University showing the drug had efficacy. We knew it was safe. Well, those are my two biggest things, with intellectual property being number 3. So did they have intellectual property? They felt they could create it. Did they have efficacy? It worked, yes. Was it safe? Yes. So to me, I said, okay, we're in. And I said, here's what I'll do. I will give you $3.5 million for 53% of the company. I'd like to go on the board. Let's build this out. But I want to get additional products. I'm a great believer that in biotech, get 5 to 10 products, be right 20 or 30% of the time, and you'll give your investors an extraordinary return. And I said, subject to diligence, obviously. So the meeting probably took maybe, it was under 90 minutes. It was certainly not very long. And that was the start of a $4 billion company, and then, and Vlad loves to tell the story of this meeting at a motel outside of Hartford Airport, and that started the company.
Cool.
And we've added a number of products, and we've added extraordinary people, an incredible focus on bringing talented people.
Yeah, to me, it's crazy the timeline. I mean, you go from where you mentioned, kind of $3 million to a $5 billion market cap in, really like 5 years. Well, that's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's the extraordinary thing about biotech. When you get it right, the numbers are remarkable. The strike rate for Deck and I has been quite extraordinary, much higher than the norm. And I just attribute it to great people doing the diligence, great people doing the development.
Curious, and maybe here we can ask about, impact investing, but also talk about, your past again on that wiki page that I was looking at. You were involved in a merchant bank, Planeteer. Do you want to mention any of those investments, exciting things you guys did, even if they weren't the biggest wins, but just kind of things that were cool? And then as a part 2 question, I'd love to talk about what goes into, what are red flags that you potentially see in some people? And, you're a big believer in people and putting people beside you, but maybe the first question first.
And, at this point in time, because of the success historically, I don't have to work, and when it came to Juvenescence, when I realized it was coming together, there's very few people that could have raised $170 million in 2 years, or aggregated 15 compelling products for aging and built the quality of team that we've built at Juvenescence. So you almost have a responsibility, because if we're right, which is our goal, is to give you a product that will allow you to live 8 years longer healthy, that changes the world. I mean, that's transformative. And by the way, I don't think it's one product. I think it's going to be a cocktail. And it's not just going to be us, but we certainly are one of the leaders right now from a standing start in October 2017. So this has been, the amazing thing. So very much is about impact. A migraine drug, 36 million Americans suffer from migraine. It's a horrible thing. It's a debilitating disease. It ruins their life. They can't change things. So it's patient-centric. You got to be ready for that. Prostate cancer, 240,000 Europeans, 135,000 Americans will get prostate cancer this year. And one of the most extraordinary experiences, going back to a question Jeffrey asked earlier, the difference between doing emergency medicine is like doing a play. I see you, I give you something, hopefully we make you better. And it's immediate feedback. When you're doing a play, 500 people, whatever, immediate feedback. You do a movie that, goes across the world, millions of people see it and hopefully enjoy it, but you don't get the immediate feedback. Usually, during drug development, you don't get the feedback. But when we launched our drug for prostate cancer, we aggregated a team of 120 salespeople. We had a big sales convention to get everybody motivated and excited about selling it. And Lynn Seeley, the chief medical officer of Medivation, came over to me and she said, Greg, will you come and meet Bill and Sarah? So October, she was, Bill and Sarah, this is Dr. Bailey. He provided the initial capital. He's on the board of directors. Sarah's starting to tear up. And Bill goes, thank you so much. He said, I was in your first clinical trial. And now I'll begin to tear up. Because it was at that point I realized in 2006, he had 6 months to live. And he's thanking me in 2012. It's at that point you realize what we're doing, and unfortunately, the difference between how long somebody lives healthy and how long it is before they die, the difference between health span and lifespan is 10 years in the developed world. So that means that on average, people are unwell for 10 years. How do we change that? And imagine that change to the economics, going back to your impact. Basically 95% of all money spent on socialized medicine is the last 5 years of life. That's amazing that you'll free up that capital for governments and people to put into other programs. So yeah, it's a huge responsibility, but an extraordinary opportunity, and definitely one, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about.
On that theme, Greg, tell us and our audience how it is that your mom influenced your thinking.
Yeah, she was extraordinary. So many people say this. She was a child prodigy in music. She was one of only 2 scholarships given out in World War II to the Royal Academy of Music as a pianist. And so the one thing she did for me is she didn't push me. She'd been so pushed. She said, you have to discover this on your own time, and you will be able to enjoy the journey, and you will find your right place. So poor mother, was getting, because she was a single mom, and she was taking enormous grief because her only child was underperforming dramatically at school. And she, every year she had to answer why her supposedly bright child was underperforming dramatically. But she let me sort it out on my own time. And then, so that was a great message. As a parent, I think it's very important that you give your children a will to live. And you teach them that they have love, but they have to deserve love. It can't be completely unconditional, or they'll abuse, abuse the privilege. And then erroneously, she told me I could be anything I wanted, but that certainly allowed me to explore a lot of pathways.
You've invested in a bunch of companies. Do you want to talk to people about, the horror stories, but also maybe, what goes into a good entrepreneur?
Yeah. I think the number one quality is perseverance for a good entrepreneur. You just have to keep going back to the trough. Very few people are Mark Zuckerberg that hit it right on the first crack. More it's Jeff Bezos, where you work and then you finally find the right path. Communication, as I said, is a huge skill set that they need to have. And then flexibility of mind, a bit of ego, but not overwhelming ego. And we have a no asshole rule at Juvenescence. So you try to hire people who get along and they're nice. Horror stories are, people will shock you. And so if there's a company dependent upon 1 or 2 individuals, it's a problem, because they'll have a marriage breakup and they'll fall into depression. They'll overextend themselves. And one of the cases was the guy bought a house he couldn't afford. So he had a mortgage he couldn't afford. So he started stealing money from the company. That was something it clearly could not have anticipated. Somebody's going to buy too much of a house and they're going to steal money. So, but the fail safe is, if you've got a team, you can deal with, the outlier. And you have to be a bit ruthless if people are going down a fraudulent path. I mean, if it's just an emotional issue that you can help them with, clearly you try to help.
Do you want to pick, and it doesn't need to be your most successful, but you know, your favorite or an interesting investment you made in the, you know, really in the past 20 years? If there anything comes to mind where you're like, oh, this was cool, I looked at this and, you know, threw some money at it at first. I mean, if it worked out, it worked out. If not, then.
You know, clearly the Biohaven story was extraordinary. To meet somebody, to feel that confident, that quick, and to have it accelerated that, you know, speed. And hats off to Vlad Korich. You know, Jeff, he just has done an amazing job growing into the role of CEO and building out an extraordinary opportunity. So those are the wonderful ones where you have that and it just all sort of clicks. On the failure side, it was interesting to me. One of my failures is a company called Opexa, and it was for multiple sclerosis, and it was the ability to try and control T cells so they wouldn't attack the myelin, which is the cause, you know, drives people into MS. It was one where I thought the science was compelling and it had to see the light of day. So I really went to bat to try and raise the money for that one. Unfortunately, it didn't work in the clinical trial. We were not able to reproduce the results of phase 1 and phase 2. But, you know, every now and again, you get one where it's so important that you step out. At Juvenescence, we have a company called Subian. Lee Wei and Stephen Haggerty, MIT, Harvard, are the two professors and scientists. And they're trying to modify your genes as an adult to prevent you from getting Alzheimer's disease. This is one that has to see the light of day to me. You know, I mean, what a profound effect it will have on society if we're able to prevent Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. I think it's a great opportunity, so I'm not taking, you know, a complete shot. It's not a great deal of money, but it has to see the light of day.
Greg, what's a typical day for a Dr. Greg Bailey when he wakes up? What time does he wake up? What does he do? What does he eat? What goes through his mind? How's your day scheduled? Do you do it yourself? What do you have for dinner? What time do you go to bed? Give us your typical day.
So basically, I live between three cities, Toronto, Los Angeles, and London, England. As I sort of keep my schedule transatlantic. So in LA, I'm waking up at 6 in the morning. In London, I'm waking up at 10 in the morning. I'm also often dealing with the West Coast, which is why, again, I cheat the schedule in England. Typical day is usually, just wake up. I actually started doing yoga, sort of with some stretching in the mornings immediately, and then I'd write on the phone. I skip breakfast. First meal, whichever geography I'm in, is lunch. So it's mainly phone calls, catching up on emails, depending on where I am, is, you know, all part of the day. I get about 300 emails a day. So I do have somebody who schedules. I lost control of my schedule about 2 years ago. Christine handles that. And then from there, at lunch, it's basically fish or chicken, a little bit of protein, and 4 or 5 servings of vegetables. I have a sweet tooth, so quite often I finish with something sweet. Definitely my vice, my shortcoming. Throughout the calls, by the way, every 20 minutes I get up and I do some sport of exercise along the way, whether it's, you know, yoga position, sit-ups, push-ups, or I have a little bit of weights. So that, because you're not supposed to, you know, sit for a prolonged period of time, so that's the new smoking. So every 20 minutes, you're supposed to get up and circulate. Back to work after lunch, more phone calls, can go into whatever time, 8, 9 o'clock if I'm in London. And if I'm in the Los Angeles, usually ends around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, whereupon I go to the gym for an hour and a half an hour of biking and an hour of weights. And then, you know, dinner again is a combination of chicken, fish, and another 5 or 6 vegetables. Also, I have 3 to 5 different fruits, usually with lunch. So I have a collage of fruits, including blueberries, strawberries, you know, for vitamin C, antioxidants. The blueberry skins are supposed to have a role in preventing cognitive decline. Try to make sure that I allow myself 9 hours in bed, hopefully to get 8 hours of sleep. And I drink probably 1.5 liters of water during the day. and then throw in yoga periodically and go out biking, instead of the weights occasionally.
And do you take supplements and stuff, or?
I definitely biohack. I take metformin. Had some really interesting results in decreasing your chance of cancer, based probably on the fact that cancers prefer sugar, and it takes sugar down. In and around age 50, you become insulin resistant, which means that the insulin no longer brings the sugar down in your various organs, or in the case of a malignancy, and particularly problematic in the brain. About 5 or 6 years ago now, began to believe, with a few others, that one of the forms of Alzheimer's disease is type 3 diabetes, which means that because the insulin no longer brings the sugar down in the brain, it goes crazy high in your brain, and that actually begins to cascade towards Alzheimer's disease. So I take metformin every day. It's going to have a very interesting study to also see if it has other anti-aging effects. But in retrospective studies, people on metformin live longer, and people with COVID, it also has a great effect in preventing serious severity of the COVID disease. Then I also take, if you take metformin, you have trouble absorbing B12, so I take B12 supplement, and you also need a little bit of calcium every third day, so I do that. Then astaxanthin, a potent antioxidant. Occasionally take that, not real science. Being over the age of 50, I take Crestor, a statin, again showing a role in cancer. I'm less concerned about it from the cardiovascular side, but more for the other aspects of statins. I take vitamin D3, particularly now with COVID, and B3 again now because of COVID, not normally. And then fish oil for sure. I'd like to get Visipa, but they just got it in the UK now. And that's a fish oil, which has anti-inflammatory effects, which are quite profound. Zinc and lithium, one boosts the immune system, the other one has had interesting effects in longevity, again, supplement. So the 2 meds and then a number of supplements is the shorter answer.
How do you have time to work after ingesting all those?
Yeah. Ray Kurzweil was on 250 supplements at one point. And Declan, my partner, former head of drug development at Pfizer, goes, can you imagine how they coagulated his stomach and the drug-to-drug interaction? He's now cut down to 150 supplements a day, so you should short the stock of whatever pharmacy he was dealing with.
So, Greg, this is a good time to lead into a little deep dive into Juvenescence. And now that we're just talking about, what it is that you take and vitamins and stuff, that's awesome. You guys you're gonna talk about what it is that Juvenescence is doing. But one thing that you are doing is creating this longevity functional beverage. We'll call it a functional beverage because at the moment I don't know if that's the way you would call it. But are you taking your own functional beverages that you're making? Are they available for you to use at the moment?
Are you drinking your own Kool-Aid? We had to run a clinical trial to prove safety before our launch. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we were supposed to do it with the DoD and Ohio State University. Our employees became our lab rats, including myself. So we took it. It's dramatic. It's called Metabolic Switch. It launches in the United States first, and then we'll go international with it. In mammals, it was geroprotective, they lived longer, cardioprotective, protect the heart, and neuroprotective, protected their brain. So an extraordinary effect. And basically, to get into ketosis, you have to be above 0.5 after waking up in the morning, and so having fasted for 8 or 9 hours. I'm 0.1 to 0.3. Upon taking it, I go to 1.8 in an hour and a half, which is ketones are preferred by your heart, so it makes your heart more efficient. And it also now is what your brain begins to use and hopefully prevent that cascade towards what I talked about. We're doing a clinical trial to see now if it also plays a role in stripping amyloid and tau out of the brain. So really exciting product. And when it's launched, myself and Jim Mellon, my other business partner, have already ordered a case.
Sure.
Oh, that's great.
So tell us a bit about now that we're getting into Juvenescence, tell us, what is the mission, the vision of Juvenescence? What's the big story? Where are you going?
Yeah, it's not about just increasing lifespan. I mean, it'd be a nice benefit, but more important is health span. Neither one of you, I assume, would want to live an extra 30 years if you're in a wheelchair, you have Alzheimer's disease. So first and foremost, we have to settle that, which is why when people say about us living to 1,000 or 200, 150, until we sort out neurodegeneration, that's not possible. So be amazing if that Suviant has that drug that prevents you from getting Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. That's a huge step towards increasing the quality of people's lives. And as I said earlier, the big thing I'd love to give you is a product that you can take every day that allows you to live another 8 to 10 years healthy. And, you know, we were often criticized for, you know, is this going to be for the wealthy only? And what's it going to do to the population? They asked Aubrey de Grey, who's one of the icons in the industry, that. And Aubrey has quite a acidic sense of humor. He turned to the interviewer and he said, either it's going to be only for the rich, in which case we will not have a problem with the population, or it's going to be for everyone and we will have a problem with the population. Which one would you like me to answer? The key thing that I'd ask either one of both of you, would you pay me $1 a day for you and every member of your family if you could live 8 to 10 years longer?
Yes. Yeah, of course.
So how many people globally can afford $1 a day?
Big chunk.
Half the world at least.
Yeah, I would say all, you know, most of Europe, most of North America, huge chunks of India, China, the rest of Asia, lots of people in South America, Africa, and certainly Australia. So it's probably well over 1 billion people. If 1 billion people are paying you $1 a day, you're making $365 billion a year on if it's a small molecule, you can make it for 5 cents. We do not have to charge a lot of money for these products. You know, it's something that Deck, Jim, and I firmly believe is to make this affordable for everyone. And you can still deliver an extraordinary return for your investors and be a sustainable company. So this is a whole different metric. I mentioned the numbers, 250,000 women will get breast cancer in Europe and North America, 400 million Europeans and 360 million North Americans are going to get older. It's just totally different metrics. The mission is to bring that quality of life to people's lives, which has enormous economic benefits to particularly countries with socialized medicine, but even somewhere like the United States, it just changes the economics of people living healthy until they pass away.
If I'm 35, just like you, Greg, if I'm 35 and I start drinking the Juvenescence drink today, does that mean I'll get that extra 8 years, or must I have taken it 10 years ago? Or when do you get that full effect of, hey, I've taken it for a year, I've taken it for 5 years, I've taken it for a week? What is I guess the dosage is kind of my question. You know, what would be the dosage of the drink? Is it something, I mean, I know it's tough to answer.
It's a drink that you would drink in the morning, and hopefully we'll have a powder next year. Nobody can answer that question in humans. You know, what would happen is you say, if you took it at age 30, or did you need to start at age 20 or 60? Nobody knows. We do know in mammals, particularly mice, where so much of the research goes down, and was done by the actual founder scientist of this product at the Buck Institute, that mammals, like mice that are given it from the day they're born, live 25% longer. So we do know that effect. What would the effect have been if we started them? Mice generally live 2 to 3 years. You know, we started it 6 months in. We don't know the answer. We certainly don't know it for humans. What we do know is it increases something called left ventricular ejection fraction, which basically means your heart's more efficient. So for those unfortunate people who have congenital heart disease, or the 80, 100 million people over the age of 60 or 70 who have problems with their heart, it's going to have a dramatic difference in their quality of life and their lifespan. It is a drink. You would take it in the morning, although we have a division called JuView, which I'm super excited about, where we will allow you to input your ketone levels, and we will make recommendations as to what time of the day you should take it, and right down to what sort of food you should be eating.
So Greg, how did you and the team come up with the name Juvenescence, and what kind of money did you need to raise? I think back in 2017 is when you got the ball really rolling with Juvenescence, and and by the way, that leads me to one interesting little story that is kind of off topic, but not off topic. And I wanted to mention that you have a tremendous supporter of everything that you do, and that's Dr. Anna. And
Oh, wow.
Anna, yeah, and as you know, we went for that incredible lunch back in Barcelona a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. And I had said to Anna back then that you need to come have a lunch with Dr. Bailey. You got to sit down with this guy, and he's a phenomenal entrepreneur. He's a great old friend, and I want you to learn about the entrepreneurial side of being a doctor. So you become a doctor, and then you can also look at other entrepreneurial things in life. And I remember, we went for that amazing lunch. She came back, she loved it, and she's like, oh my God, I never thought about that. And then that led, of course, to a really funny, ironic story. And here we are having this beautiful interview today, which is, just 3 years later, or approximately 3 years later, Anna did her internship in London with Jim Mellon at Juvenescence. And this was funny. Really, yeah, this is when Juvenescence was just at the very, day one. It was the birth. And Anna went to London. She spent a couple months there in the office learning, and she did the very first pitch deck for Juvenescence with Anthony Chow, and she loved it. And she sat back and go, oh my God, I'm applying medical knowledge to business. And then the cute story about the amount of money that was being raised for this thing back then. I mean, she was shocked. So she's deeply grateful, Greg, for your inspiration back then and where she is today. I mean, she is in the pediatric surgery side at the hospital in Switzerland. That's awesome. But she will be joining us full time at M2 Biosciences in November. So just around the corner, and using that experience just like you did. So I mean, you spent 10 years doing it, but she spent a couple of years now in medicine, in emergency, doing the exact thing that you were doing in the pediatric side. Yeah. And now she's going to come aboard full time and work in our stuff with the clinical research in the cannabis and the medicinal mushroom and psilocybin side. So a hat tip to you. I'm saying it on her behalf, but thank you very much, Greg, to you for that inspirational lunch. It was truly amazing. On that long diatribe, I'm going to hand it back to you and tell us about Juvenescence.
Well, first off, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it is, if you could help inspire somebody, what a wonderful gift for both of you, for both parties. And it's interesting because I will often challenge people to say, how are you going to change the world? And most people say, I can't change the world. How would I do it? And yet the interesting thing is that we really can. I mean, if anyone had told, Mrs. Vivian Bailey's son, that he could potentially create drugs that would, allow a cancer patient to live 10 years longer, or to help somebody who couldn't go to their wedding because they had a migraine, or this what we're doing now, it would have been laughable. And yet you can. It's just trying to find your niche. So I'm delighted that Anna listened, because we often get pigeonholed into what we started as our career, that's where we should end up in our career. And that's not the way this is. This is a buffet. It's not a single meal. You can try different things. So thank you very much for sharing that story with me. And good on Anna to find her own path. As far as Juvenescence, about 9 years ago, I met a gentleman named Luigi Fontana, who's one of the top people in the world for caloric restriction, which is the #1 way to live longer healthy. 1,800 calories for men, 1,200 calories for women. And then the next year I met Walter Longo, who said, you don't have to do that every day. You can do it intermittent fasting once every 3 months, 5 days, 800 calories, no carbs, no meats during that period of time. And you will reset the body. It tricks the body of thinking you're going to a starvation state, and it takes it about 3 months before it figures out, oh, you're not going to a starvation state, and reprocesses energy differently. Then I met Walter Bortz, and Walter was the head of gerontology at Stanford. And he basically said, he had a formula for how long you live, which I disagree with, and I told him that. He said it's 15% your genes, genetic profile. We know that from twin studies, because that seems to be what the overlap is. 15 to 25% is actually the right number. And he says 25% is lifestyle. If you're in a loving relationship and and you're, living in a society that treats you with respect, you will live longer. If you're climbing ice cliffs without a rope, you're going to die younger. So lifestyle 25%. He thinks the rest, the residual 60% is all exercise. I disagree. I think diet plays an enormous role as well. But he says it is huge. And what he told me was, if you're fit, you mentally and physically decline at 0.5% a year, unfit at 2% a year. That's huge, factor of 4. So that was quite a remarkable number. So there's nothing magical about, diet or exercise. Fundamentally, they're doing something on the cellular level. And so scientists in the last 10 years have discovered what those pathways are. And when they discover them, they know how to manipulate them. So I started bombarding Jim and Deck with these articles about how we were going to be able to modify aging. Jim took the ball and run. He's written 6 books, now his 7th book. He's about to do his 8th on clean meat. And he basically showed that he went to all the top institutions, met all the top scientists. So he gave Deck and I a roadmap. The name of his book was Juvenescence. Jim is outstanding at creating names. I'm rubbish at making names. Ascend Healthcare started out as GB Co. because my initials call it a day. That was the name of the company. Happily, smarter heads prevailed. So that was how we got to Juvenescence. And now we're going to be going with our products as Juve Labs, because so nobody seems to know how to spell Juvenescence except Jim, Deck, and I.
No, I mean, so talk us through the funding cycle. I think that was
second part of the
question. Yeah.
So we did a seed round in October of 2017. It was oversubscribed in 2 weeks. Basically, I asked my 2 partners if I could go back to the people who supported me in Medivation and Biohaven and Portage. And I said, just for friends and family. Apparently I have more friends and family than I knew. As we wanted to raise 5 and we had 10, and then finally I said to Jim, I'm not going to take this dilution. So he and I wrote $1 million checks to participate in that round. 6 months later, we had 7 projects. It was just 2 of us working at the time, full time, Alex and I. And basically, we needed money. And so we went out to raise $50 million in a Series A at a $200 million pre with downside protection. And what happened at that point in time was we sold out in 4 weeks, oversubscribed $53 million, mainly ultra high net worths, because we didn't have the luxury of going after, institutional investors, because I needed the money before the summer, and it was the end of May. And they take 4 to 6 months, as you know, to do financings, and I don't like VCs. We ended up doing the ultra high net worths, and we had Foresight, a very sophisticated biotech group, an insurance company, a generalist fund, and that was that round. In the fall, we had another 8 projects, so we needed more money. So we had to raise $50 million again. And so we did a $100 million Series B round at a $400 million pre. And basically that was oversubscribed at 104 million. The first $50 million came in very quickly, which is what we needed. And then we had luxury of going after sovereign wealth funds in the second portion of that.
And so Greg, and you're doing a raise currently, and how much money are you raising now? And if you're allowed to share, what valuation approximately would that be?
Yeah, so we're in the midst of raising $250 million, $150 million of equity, and $100 million convertible bond, which bears interest at 3% for 2 years, 4% in year 3. And if we go public, they can convert at a 20% premium to the IPO price, which we plan to do in the next 8 to 12 months, markets willing, go public. And the $150 million is Series C, and it will convert at a 50% discount to the IPO, but it has a floor of 850 million. So if we're able to go public at 2 billion, they will, get a double to get 100% return. And if it goes public at $1 billion, then they will actually be diminished to 700 million to get a 50% return.
What an interesting little structure to put it in there. Makes it very, very interesting, not so boring. So Greg, tell us, how are you using artificial intelligence for formulation of your products, the Juvenescence line of products? By the way, how many SKUs are there in the line of Juvenescence products? And how are you using artificial intelligence to do the formulation for the products?
We took a hard look at it and working with a number of groups. We have in silico medicine, which is very good at chemistry, machine learning, and we invested in them, and they helped us find a product. It should have taken 2 years to discover a drug candidate. They came up with potential candidates in 45 days. Machine learning is outstanding at chemistry. It's rubbish at biology. Biology is chaos theory, and we don't have the computing power yet to do that. When we get quantum computing, at that point, that will be an enormous transition in the world of drug discovery. Machine learning is also very good at drug development, and there's a company named Netramark out of Canada that we started working with for that, to try and find specific populations. So instead of having to run a clinical trial with 100 patients, you can run a clinical trial with 50 patients where you know they are the optimum population. It's interesting to me how many clinical trials failed because they had the wrong population. It would have worked brilliantly if you'd only done it on a certain population. We're seeing that with the discrepancy between genders. Some drugs will work better in men than women. Some drugs will work better in Asians than Caucasians. So it's very good at that. What we've done is we've created a division under Charlie Roberts, who's done an amazing job building a team of the Turing Award winner of 2018, two of the top people in the world for graph convolutional networks, which is this form of machine learning that's the backbone of Pinterest at Twitter and one of the foundational forms of machine learning at Google DeepMind. But nobody was using it to do drug combination and repurpose drugs. We think this is an extraordinary opportunity to use machine learning for that sort of opportunity. So metformin was, it's for type 2 diabetes, but it seems to have this remarkable effect as far as modifying aging. How many other metformins are there out there that we're unaware of that would have an amazing role in anti-aging? And so we think that the graph convolutional networks will be an extraordinary opportunity to find that. And happily, the Gates Foundation feels that we are best in class. So they've given us a grant, and we'll turn over their COVID data so that we can try and find drug combinations and repurpose drugs for COVID. Just found out that about a week ago.
That's great. That's fantastic news.
Yeah, really exciting for the team.
I'm just going to make a quick little transition into something that is totally going to catch you off guard. Are you ready for this one? So I recently saw that you and Jim, and maybe it's just you and Jim, but probably a couple other guys, you invested in the psychedelic space, and you put a few shekels into a deal based out of London. What happened there? I mean, I recall mentioning to you at the Master Investor, I think 2 years ago now, and I said, hey, Greg, we're going to be doing this, and what do you think? And you turned to me and said, hey, that's a great idea. I love it. Very cool. But you also said, and it's something that we deeply believe in, that it's all about the rigor of the science. This is not about, going out partying, getting stoned on marijuana, or not about going and tripping on magic mushrooms in the middle of the woods on the weekend. This is about science. It's about discovery and applying, knowledge and great science to these products to find, hopefully, great drugs that can help people. So I saw that you made that investment recently. Is that something that, how did that come about?
Yeah, I've been reticent. I've been approached by a lot of people in the cannabis industry as it was, gaining traction. And I had a number of inherent issues with that, was they weren't going about it in a methodical, say, rigorous science, proper due diligence, had real drug developers involved with it. And I was also concerned because, as the CEO of Juvenescence, in an area which is anti-aging, which is filled with charlatans, that I probably didn't want to be perceived as, doing every sort of unusual idea. Biohaven, that drug that I agreed to finance with $3.5 million at a $3 million pre out of Yale University, is a sister to ketamine, and it works extraordinarily well in some patients with depression. So I'd already begun to see that these agents, whether it's MDMA or LSD or psilocybin or cannabis, the reason they do what they do is because they're very psychoactive drugs. They actually work on clinical pathways in your brain. How do we modify them? So to your point, there's no psychomimetic effect that would make me want to take them to party. And yet I get the derived benefit, the clinical benefit for epilepsy, the clinical benefit for treatment-resistant depression or OCD. And so I do think there's a great opportunity. As Juvenescence was becoming more credible, I felt more comfortable, backing another area of exciting science that a lot of people are very skeptical about. But I think we're at a point where we can do it. Jim brought the idea forward. He invited me to participate to make sure that they were doing drug development, and they've got a great team from J&J that they've hired, and some of the top scientists in the world, including the team out of Imperial College, which specializes in this area. So hats off to you, Jeffrey, for getting in early and the opportunity you created with M2Bio.
Thanks.
It's going to be very intriguing as we sort out the right analogs of these drugs that have the clinical efficacy without the positive effect if you want to party, but deleterious effect if you want to go into the office after you've taken psilocybin.
Yeah, no, it's been thank you very much for that, Greg. I appreciate that. It's I remember when we chatted about it, kind of people looked at me like, what are you talking about? You're not allowed to do that. Well, I said, well, actually we can, and we do have all the licenses, permits in Africa, and we had to apply for all these things. It's not like we just set up a place and started doing these things. So
come down to the shack and get some magic mushrooms here in South Africa.
Yeah, certainly not like that. So, but anyway, that's amazing. And I'm glad that it's always inspiring to see. We do talk, obviously, besides doing these interviews, and it's always inspiring to see, you and Jim and others looking at, other little areas and saying, hey, you know what, maybe, there's something here. And you mentioned it in Biohaven, like you can't just go after that one home run and hope that one home run is going to hit. You got to have a portfolio of ideas out there. And even if you're putting $1 million or $2 or $3, one of these is going to hit, and that's where you're going to make the big return. So very, very cool. And that's neat to see that you guys are in that space.
This is the perfect time to ask. You guys have already said little tidbits, but curious, like people are going to watch this and be like, okay, wait, Greg Bailey doesn't do too many interviews. Why is this guy talking to Jeff Robinson, Jason Coles? Do you guys want to talk about, kind of your friendship and, how you guys have worked in the past a little bit?
That's a great question. I'll start off on that, Greg. It goes back, again, as I said earlier, Greg's 35, I'm 33. So we've known each other for 10 years. But we go back actually all the way back to the Toronto days when I met Greg. I guess I was in university at the time. I was in my late teens, 17, 18. My eldest brother, Terrence, and my middle brother, John, friends with Greg. Greg was a doctor, and I remember hurting myself, and Terrence said, yeah, go see Dr. Bailey, he's cool. I did, and I said, hey, I hurt my hand, what should I do? He looked at me, slapped me, he's like, hey, get out of here, your hand is fine. Take 2 of these and you'll be fine. So we met, we ended up developing all these great friendships. I always watched what Greg was involved in the medical side as he got more involved in the public equity markets. He had a couple of stocks way back then that just, they rock and roll. And these are stocks back in the, 90s, I guess it was, that, literally went from, not pennies, but something like that to many, like $10, $20, like, oh my God. And so, we had a bunch of fun and looking and playing and sharing. And as we got older, it was actually Greg that had proposed that, maybe we do something with that portage. And I remember meeting Greg in LA with my brother Terrence actually at the restaurant, the Ivy. And that's when Terrence said, yeah, Greg's going to pitch us on the biotech deal. And I said, wow, that's pretty cool. And we talked about it. And that's where the whole thing with portage, using that as the vehicle to grow the biotech company. Greg and his team did such an incredible job, obviously, of of building that into what it is today. And here we are all these years later. We've always kept in touch, and we're working on, we're always, sharing ideas on what it is that we could potentially do together in many different areas. I have a fascination for medical and science. Obviously, the company that we're involved in is that. And I love not only, what I do as my work, but I love every day just being curious, and I'm a sponge for learning. And I'm always bouncing ideas off of Greg about, would this be the right way to do this? Or, could this be a way of approaching this problem? So that's what I love about our relationship. It's all about learning and sharing. And it's an amazing, for me, it's a very enriching relationship all the time. Over to you, Greg.
Yeah, not a whole lot. That was funny when people say not a whole lot to add, and then they speak for 10 minutes. Basically, I just graduated from medical school, and I'd met Terrence socially in Toronto, and then as the years go on, as Jeffrey said, is nurtured into a business relationship. If you make people money, they tend to be enduring friends. And so happily, Portage went from 4 cents to $1.10, and has done a cutback, so it's at $10. And it wasn't done. It's the one that put up the 3.5 million for Biohaven, which went, through the roof. So we did a dividend about 2.5 years ago, where we dividended stock now worth $700 million to the investors who invested the 3 million. And so, and Portage now is recalibrated to become an immuno-oncology company with 7 exciting, my usual business model, with 7 exciting targets, and it will be doing a financing and moving to NASDAQ. So very excited. Extraordinary team. Ian Walters, who ran a number of the immuno-oncology trials for Bristol Myers, and Rob Kramer, who ran preclinical oncology at J&J and Bristol Myers, is the team that we hired, along with Alan Shaw, a very sophisticated CFO. So great team yet again. Deck, Jim, and I are on the board of directors. So so back to on topic. So met Jeffrey, saw him at the Master Investor Conferences. Always chatted, always an open door to chat. And when I was in Barcelona, I always made a point of seeing Jeffrey, and had the pleasure of meeting Anna. And amazed to hear this anecdote that Jeffrey just shared.
I mean, Jeff, you talk about the importance of, asking why. Greg, I know you have a little snippet on the question about why. Did you want to, kind of give a little detail?
When I met Walter Bortz and we were chatting about life, and I was disagreeing with him about exercising being part of this equation for how long we're going to live, he was Buckminster Fuller's doctor. Buckminster Fuller is the reason that we have a chemical entity called the buckyball. He was one of the great futurists of the 20th century. And Walter was his physician when, unfortunately, Buckminster Fuller was dying. I think he was in his 80s. And he said to Buckminster, "You've had an extraordinary life. What you've seen, what you did, what you created and thought and vision, and how many of the things you saw is in the future that are coming to be realized." And Buckminster Fuller said, "I'm very blessed." He said, "I grew up in a loving family." He said, "I got along well with my siblings. My parents were happily married. We had a nice home, nothing extraordinary, but I always had food, and it was safe and secure." And he said, "It was amazing." And he said, "Until I was age 7. And he said, "Then it's been all downhill." Which is obviously, as the English say, Walter was gobsmacked. Because that isn't what you think from this guy who's had this incredible career. He said, "Well, what happened at age 7? He goes, "Age 7, I stopped asking why, and I started asking how." And I think that that's really important in doing a business, and who you work with. Why are you with them? How you became with them is a whole different metric. When I was doing surgery at UCLA, Le Savoy said to me, one of their top doctors, he said, "Greg, if they can't explain why they do it that way, it's probably not the right way to do it. Because if it is the right way to do it, you can explain it." And so in business, in life, definitely lots of questions that start with why.
One thing I wanted to touch on was get your opinion on this whole COVID thing. Maybe you could give us an answer in a couple minutes. Like when this whole thing kind of hit us a year ago, and where we're at almost a year ago and where we're at today, and what do you see going to happen maybe in the next 6 months? What do you see may happen? A 2-minute kind of summary of this terrible, virus that's hit the world.
So COVID-19 is an age-related disease. So Jim and Dec are part of the Immunoresilience Task Force to try and figure out how to boost the immune system to the UK government. It's a huge piece of Juvenescence, is how we boost your immune system. This is not probably going to be an isolated event. We don't even know, now that we've seen 3 reinfections, what's going to happen with that element of this pathology. The extraordinary thing to me, because the pharmaceutical and biotech industry has been a pariah. I mean, I think we're just behind politician and investment bankers for, the prices that we charge, which is something that's very important to Dec and I, that we never do that. But the way that they rallied around this was amazing. The sense of community, that people working together, staying indoors, wearing masks, it's amazing. I hope that that's a residual effect 6 to 8 months down the road, that we continue that feeling and the knowledge that we are incredible pack animals, that if I have to stay in my house alone, I will go nuts. You need that human interaction. You're part of the community, and what you do matters. You eat bat in China, and you may cause a global crisis. I mean, if that's what took place, which it sounds like so far. 3 things will change the world on this. One is obviously a treatment or cure. So, you get it, I give you the treatment, no residual, you immediately improve, and no residual long-term effect. Or, which is a big deal, is what long-term residual damage you're doing to your lung, your heart, your kidneys. And neurologically. The other thing is obviously a vaccine, and the first vaccine should start coming out over the next 2 months. And hopefully they're both safe and efficacious, because we're certainly concerned about safety with the Operation Warp Speed. And then the last one, and it was very exciting news yesterday, and Abbott's saying that they've got a $5 15-minute test. I mean, if every building you go into, you got tested going in, and we know you're negative, then it's a problem. Then there's no problem. Otherwise, how many people do I put in an elevator in a 60-story building? The repercussions as far as, economically are going to be profound. Obviously, we've all seen that. Will, again, either a potent vaccine or a diagnostic is a huge difference. Otherwise, there's industries that are going to have a great difficulty ever recovering.
Just as a little side note on that, there's South Africa has started a clinical trial now using cannabis as for the respiratory system. They've started it about 10 days ago for as it relates to COVID. It's one of the there are many trials going on around. This directly went into human, which is pretty cool. I love the fact that they were open to doing it, so they did do it. They weren't sitting back saying, no, we can't do it. So that was very, very interesting, and might get kind of a hat tip to Africa for being entrepreneurial thinking. I think it's great.
No, good on them.
Yeah, Greg. So my kind of last question is the Juvenescence products are we're looking at an October launch. Where could people find them? Will they be available everywhere in the world? What would be the story on that?
Sure. The website, Juve Labs, or Juvenescence, but much easier to remember, JUVLAB.com. And we'll have a very sophisticated website with e-commerce engine that we're doing with Code and Theory that will be up in September over due time. Different jurisdictions all have different reasons. We'll probably go for Europe next. We're going to set up Juve China to get into the Chinese market, both with our pharmaceuticals and with our RX, and also our veterinary opportunities that we have as well to help domestic animals modify their aging pattern. And so, but initially for metabolic switch, it will be that. Next year, we hope to launch cardio switch and neurological switch. We'll have our IP protected product with non-IP products like blueberry skins I mentioned earlier that have a neuroprotective quality, or there's a number of products that have a strong effect in cardiovascular, so that one pill, one drink does all. But yes, US unfortunately first, and the first two cases, hopefully, to Jim Mellon and I.
Well, Greg, on that note, when you go into your fridge after our discussion, please open up your blueberries and take note where they come from. They come from South Africa.
South Africa and Spain.
South Africa exports all of the greatest blueberries in the world to Canada, all across Europe, everywhere. And funnily enough, they actually export to Spain, even though Spain exports out. So
I know your brother shared that with me.
Yeah, they export out their grade A blueberry, and they import in our grade A, which I got to tell you, I mean, when I go buy the blueberries here, when I buy any of the fruit here, Greg, it actually tastes like fruit is supposed to taste. It has flavor. It's the real McCoy. There's just such a difference between this and the stuff you get in Toronto at Loblaws or whatever that, I don't know, it just doesn't taste like fruit anymore. It all tastes the same to me.
No, it's in the hothouse. I was in Helsinki with your brother at the World Championships for hockey, and we were walking along the shoreline, and they had blueberries, and he bought a case of the carton, whatever it was, of them. He goes, "They're from Spain." He said, "I can't get them in Spain. I can get them in Helsinki." So yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, one thing that we covered last time that I really loved is, you know, what are your thoughts on the statement, if you live for another 20 years, you'll be able to live for another 50? And kind of what are your thoughts? You know, some people, of course, thinking you're getting some crazy injection. Obviously, you're saying it might be more of a cocktail and a lot of things go into it. But did you want to kind of chat about that statement and maybe, you know, is there some truth behind it?
So Aubrey de Grey, icon in the industry about 10 years ago, said that we will be, if you were under the age of 50, you would be able to live forever. And so I was talking to Aubrey and asked him to explain that to me. He basically said he thinks that we will reach escape, or we may already have reached escape velocity. And what that means that in 1 year, I'm going to be able to add 2 years to your life span. So he wasn't saying today we've got a product, you'll live to 1,000. He was saying what we discover in the next 50 years will allow you to live to 200. What we discover in those 100 years will allow you to live to 300, and so on and so on. And then I was going back to a previous comment, you know, until we sort out Alzheimer's and regeneration of limbs, you know, nobody wants to be in a wheelchair, have Alzheimer's, you know, for 600 years. That's the thesis behind living to 1,000. The only way we could die, Jason, was accident, suicide, or homicide, because I can't control them. So I've eliminated all disease. I've got your cells so that they can live forever and regenerate. How long do you think the average person would live if the rate stayed the same? Because suicide may actually increase if we had longevity. How long do the two of you think we would live on average if we only way to die was from accident, suicide, or homicide?
150.
I'll say
100. Jason,
100.
what do you got for me? We're almost at 100 now, Jason. So just point that out. It ranges somewhere from 600 to 1,024, depending on the modeling. And 1 person in 5 billion will live to 25,000. So the numbers are sort of screwy. And what's concerning, and you know, is going to be major issues, is the psychiatric effects of living to 300. You know, how does that affect the human brain? 2 is, do we create bubble people? I mean, it's one thing to go out, you know, and do parachuting if you think, I'm going to die in 10 years. It's a whole other thing is you realize you're going to lose 900 years. You know, so lots of interesting social ramifications to increasing longevity. But right now, as I said, Juvenescence is focused on just making you healthy longer.
Oh,
next.
Cool. All right. Well, the next one, I want to chat about your decision-making process and, you know, things that you value. To give you insight, you know, you've talked about the fact that, you know, Jim is the best instinctual investor you've ever met. You know, you talk about working with extraordinary people. Do you want to chat about, you know, some of the people you have either working for Juvenescence or also people that you've invested in and kind of what stood out about them?
Yeah, it's, I mean, there's different roles. I mean, what you want for CEO is very different than what you want for CFO is very different from COO or division manager. You know, I think the best CEOs want the best people around them, and the weaker CEOs are less don't want people who question them. I want people to challenge me, because in being challenged, again, going back to that why and that how, if I can't explain why we're doing what we're doing, it's probably not the right thing. And if it is the right thing, I should be able to explain it. So I think that the biggest quality for that is that you're going to fail, and a number of people have a fear of failure, and I think you have to embrace failure. Silicon Valley does. They'll let you fail and resurrect and realize that there's people who learn from their failures and people who don't, and that's very, very important. So I think to be a great division manager, you have to be able to work with somebody who's your superior and somebody who's working for you. So you have to be able to work for the boss, and that's a unique skill set. So I think, as Declan would say, you have to be fit for purpose.
Oh, cool. Well, here, so I'm gonna hit you with a cool question. What are you seeing from a emerging sciences standpoint? Obviously you guys live this every day. And Jeff, feel free, you could probably add your little opinion if you wanted to. But Greg, what do you see as kind of emerging sciences other than longevity?
Sure. I think we're going to make a huge dent in how we use energy. Obviously the Elon Musk and the electric, and also I think hydrogen may resurface. I also think we are just, going to be, maybe fission. We will be discovering extraordinary things. I think that we will, and we have to begin to deal with the climate change and the environment. And so I think it's very, very important that we solve meat and meat products, and just generally create healthier foods for people. The number one export of the United States has probably been a crappy diet. Good news, you can get McDonald's at every corner in Japan. And so I think that I'm very excited about what Jim's doing with clean meat and others as well. I think that we've also got to figure out the distribution, to Jeffrey's point about getting vegetables and fruits that actually taste like the vegetable and fruit are supposed to taste. So wouldn't it be amazing to have a high-rise building that's filled with hydroponic growing fruits and vegetables that's next door to you in downtown Manhattan? So you're immediately getting fantastic quality food. So
sorry, interrupt you. Last time you said, and I quote, "The best ingredients are often things with the least ingredients."
Oh, and
so
that's priceless.
Let me throw that back.
Proportional.
So crush it.
Yeah, so it's inversely proportional. The number of ingredients is inversely proportional to your health. If you open up Fritos, it's probably got 32 ingredients. If you pick up an apple, it's got one apple. So eat apples and don't eat Doritos or Big Macs. But I can't imagine how many things are in that as well. So yeah, a limited number of ingredients in food is best for you. Thank you both for the time. Thank you both for coming back on this second call with me. Much appreciated.
Greg, thank you so much. We thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you soon in London at the end of the year at the
I look forward to it.
Show. And all the best of luck in raising the money here for Juvenescence, and we'll chat soon.